Hi again. We're looking at Merrill Tenney's overview of the various systems of interpretation of Revelation chapter 21 to 8. Last time we looked at the Augustine view of postmillennial interpretation, which was the view that was adopted by Augustine and promoted by the medieval church. So that the church was to triumph in the world, and the church in effect became the kingdom. Even after the Reformation, though, the postmillennial view continued to prevail. And here's the development of those views over the centuries after the Reformation. The form of postmillennialism, which is more familiar today, began in the 18th century with Daniel Whitby, a Unitarian commentator who shared in the production of the paraphrase and commentary on the New Testament, published in London in 1703, in collaboration with Patrick, Arnold, Lowth, and Lohman. Whitby's principles can be stated in four general propositions. 1. The first resurrection is not to be taken as a literal physical resurrection of the dead. It is a revival of the genuine spirit of the martyrs in the church, and is ecclesiastical, spiritual, and national. 2. The millennium is yet to come. It will be preceded by a triumph over the papacy and heathenism in general, and will begin with the conversion of the world at large. At this point, Whitby differed from Augustine, who identified the millennium with the present age. In this respect, Augustine was more nearly an amillennial or amillenarian than Whitby. 3. Satan will no longer trouble men. He will be bound and inactive. 4. The church will triumph completely and will fill the earth with its benevolent rule. At the close of the period, there will be a short rebellion. The final judgment will take place, and Christ will establish his eternal kingdom. Whitby's view, although admittedly a new hypothesis, became very popular and prevailed in American Protestantism throughout most of the 19th century. To those living in that great century, from the close of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815 to the opening of the First World War in 1914, the postmillennial view seemed to be justified by historical events. The increase of colonies and protectorates established by Christian nations in Africa and in Asia opened new doors for propagation of the Christian faith. The growth of a sense of missionary responsibility led to the founding of new societies and to expansion into the South Sea Islands, China, India, Africa, and other places. The agitation for the international peace table at The Hague convinced many people that war would shortly be outlawed and that the settlement of disagreements by force of arms would cease. Literacy and education increased. All of these factors produced a feeling of optimism which was embodied in the preaching that the kingdom is coming. The liberal wing of Christianity that had adopted the philosophy of evolution modified the postmillennialism of its orthodox forebears by substituting social change and a general triumph of righteousness for the personal return of Christ. Judgment was interpreted to be the inexorable working of the social process by which evil would be surmounted and ultimately discarded. On both sides of the theological fence, men felt that the age of righteousness was about to be ushered into existence. Neither of these views did justice to the command of the New Testament to watch for the return of Christ. If, according to their theology, his advent is to be preceded by at least 1,000 years of peace and righteousness, which in turn are the result of a long process of spiritual or social evolution, it could scarcely be of imminent concern to the Christians of New Testament times or of today. Nevertheless, they were concerned with the prospect of the Lord's return. The whole emphasis of Revelation is upon the fact that he cometh with the clouds, and every eye shall see him. And the book ends with the promise, Yea, I come quickly. Even though the fulfillment did not come in their time, the interpretation, which would necessarily defer that coming, was alien to the spirit of the book and to the understanding of the church. Uncertainty about the time of the return of Christ is reflected in several passages of the New Testament. Paul in 2 Thessalonians 2, 1-5, reassures his readers that the day of the Lord has not yet come, because the predicted apostasy and the revelation of the man of sin had not yet occurred. 2 Peter 3, verses 3-10, reflects the opposite attitude, disappointment that the prediction of the Lord's coming had not yet been fulfilled. Nowhere is a date set, nor was there any definite promise that the consummation would occur within the lifetime of the first century Christians. Nevertheless, the possibility of the Lord's advent was always present, and if the possibility were live, it could scarcely be admitted in the postmillennial program. Apart from lack of scriptural support for this interpretation, its optimism suffered a severe blow with the opening of the First World War in 1914. Hardly had the peace table at The Hague been established when the assassination of the Austrian Archduke at Sarajevo precipitated a conflict that plunged all of Europe and several countries of the Western Hemisphere into armed conflict. The revolutionary struggle that followed with its sequel in the even bloodier Second World War of 1939 to 45 destroyed the illusion of inevitable progress and of the gradual conquest of the world by the gospel. The spectacle of so-called Christian nations bent on the destruction of each other, the curtailment of missionary endeavor, which was the inevitable result of war, the rise of communism in Russia, which transformed a former Christian nation into an atheistic state and which has brought 800 million people behind the Iron Curtain, the wholesale murder of entire populations, such as the Jews in Germany and the farmers of the Ukraine in Russia, demonstrate quite clearly that human nature has not become Christian and that the millennium has not yet arrived. Furthermore, the birth rate of the world does not support postmillennial teaching. More heathen are born every year than are converted to Christ. Simple arithmetic shows that the population of the world is not becoming increasingly Christian. The old optimism has been eclipsed by a hopelessness that is quite its opposite, and the postmillennial concept of a world rapidly on its way to realizing the kingdom of God, as the latter is defined in the New Testament, has proved illusory. One does not have to be an incurable pessimist to admit that the world is not becoming progressively better, nor must he renounce all optimism if he believes that the only remedy lies in the intervention of God according to the program which he has provided. So we can see Merrill Tenney is definitely not supporting the postmillennial positions. Next time he will examine amillennialism. I'll put in a link to who has history vindicated, specifically about the period from 1914 onward. Has history vindicated the Watchtower or David Barron?